We are the most unhealthy society in the history of humanity. Self-inflicted. Nervous system is related to stress. So guess when the flare-up's gonna happen? Is when you are under stress. But what we are talking about here are things like rapeseed. We're talking about canola. We're talking about soybean oil that is marketed as vegetable oil, quote, vegetable oil. But that's not kale oil. It's not broccoli oil. It's manipulation in marketing. And I remember my family making that switch over and started frying French fries and fish and vegetable oil and thinking it's so much healthier. And again, for myself, 9 out of 10 people in my family, obesity, heart disease, diabetes, you name it, somebody's got something. And really almost 10 out of 10 people, include myself included. I had this degenerative spinal condition when I was just a kid. I was 20 years old, but that was years in the making to have this advanced arthritic condition. The physician told me I had the spine of an 80-year-old man when I was 20, all right? And now when I hear that and I think about it, I'm just like, there's some 80-year-olds that are killing it out here that are doing great. It's just what we've associated with aging, in our culture today. And so anyways,
the seed oils.
Yeah, and having this experience where we're inundated with all these different seed oils today and thinking that it's healthier, this is a major problem. One of the primary journals, one of the top journals in inhalation toxicology, I cited in Eat Smarter, found that simply smelling seed oils while cooking can damage your DNA.
Dude, this is going to sound crazy, but growing up, my family, they're vegetarian, and, growing up and everything like that, we're from India, and everywhere you go over there, here too, but it's all cooking with seed oils, right? It used to be coconut oil, other things like that, but now it's all seed oil, ghee. And then everybody was convinced that they came to America and this is the better way of doing it. Margarine, seed oils, other stuff. Let's get rid of the ghee and not cook with that anymore. And my mom growing up would make this dish. It's like a little flat bread, and it's called puri. It's like from the tradition in the region that I'm from in India, Gujarat, and you would kind of fry it. It's like a little fried bread that's there, and she would cook it downstairs and kind of fry it on Sundays. It was something that we'd have with like chai, and we'd have puri, like a little bit of bread and coffee in the morning, kind of our version of it. And when they would cook it, I'd be sleeping in on a Sunday, and I'm in high school, middle school, and I would get the worst headaches every Sunday when she would cook this. Downstairs the windows are open, everything like that, but upstairs hot air rises, and our whole house would be filled with these fumes from this vegetable oil that was there. And I'd wake up with almost like, not full on migraines. I didn't even know what migraines were back then, but like really severe headaches. And even still to this date, when I am in a place that doesn't have good ventilation, or if I go to a restaurant, we're meeting friends and they're not using the best oils that are there, I can see an impact, right, on my brain cognition and function. And it feels like a little bit of like my brain's being suffocated.
Oh, that's such a good analogy. And this is an N of one, but this is the most important data.
Right.
That we ignore.
It's not to extrapolate out to everybody else, but it's to pay attention to your own body.
Yes.
Because my body is going to be different than somebody else's. But if we can find these little quirks for ourselves, it's all just about putting ourselves in the right direction for health.
And the key here is you paying attention to it and making the association, right? So that you see that, okay, it's happening when this thing is happening, cooking this particular thing, and then I have the associated headache. And so the question is why? What's going on there? Well, these things are so freaking toxic. The manufacturing plants to take, we'll just say, soybean oil or canola oil, and to turn it into something that is palatable by humans, the bleaching, the deodorizing, the high heat processing.
It's like a 13 to 27 step process.
It's not extra virgin. It's been around the block a lot before it gets to you and it's palatable. That's the thing. It's just like, it's so distant from anything natural at this point. And now here's the biggest part. And this is the freakiest, scariest part, but also we can change this. Taking biopsies from humans. So literally just taking and analyzing their fat tissue and looking at what are their fat cells made of from folks earlier in the earlier part of the 1900s versus today. And so looking at biopsies from the average person, again, about 100 years ago, the amount of polyunsaturated fats, which again, primarily in our diet are from these highly refined seed oils, but we find it in natural foods and they're great. There's wonderful processes that they do. The makeup of the average human fat cell of PUFAs, polyunsaturated fats, was about 2 to 4%. Today, the average person's fat cells, when doing a biopsy, is made up of about 25% polyunsaturated fats. Literally, the ingredients that make up the human body are different now. We're made of these things. It's not just like, oh yeah, we're just consuming these things, it's doing all this stuff. No, it's literally making your fat cells out of this very, very volatile type of fat. Because as mentioned, they're not stable, right? So you're going to be more subject to, we'll just use an analogy with our skin, for example, and sun exposure. You're out there cooking yourself in canola oil, basically, because your cells are literally made of this stuff. It's not a joke. And we see this increased incidence of skin cancer, and we're like, oh, you just need to wear sunscreen. No, that's not what it's about. What are you made of? What is the sun interacting with? And so this isn't just a small thing. And the primary way that folks are consuming this is through processed foods, obviously, and then we're proactively cooking with these things, and it's very abnormal. We have not done that in the history of humanity, ever.
A new experiment.
But what we have been using, ghee, butter, animal fats, tallow. We've been using coconut oil, has been around for centuries. We've been using these types of fats that are much closer. They're just basically food, fat extraction.
Step on it or cook it a little bit, and then it's ready to go.
That's it. Food, fat extraction, not this, again, 20-hour process, all of these chemicals added to make it palatable, because it would taste so terrible for us to try to consume those things. And so the bottom line is this, again, these being so volatile and easily damaged, what they would do to increase the stability of them is to hydrogenate them, right? So partially hydrogenated vegetable oil, that's what margarine is, for example. And I remember I was just a little kid, and I remember when my grandmother made the switch from butter to country crock, because, the doctor that my grandfather was seeing was like, hey, you've got high blood pressure, you got these different things, start using, get rid of the fat and start using these, vegetable oil spreads. My grandfather, within the next couple of years, ended up having 2 heart attacks.
Because all these seed oil fats that are not really plant vegetable fats, they are super inflammatory. This goes back to the conversation of not just neuroinflammation, just total body inflammation. And
the rhetoric, the absence of education in these things, it's very blanket statements, that we got into this fat phobia, he's trying to help him, but he's going off of the small bit of data that he was informed with, our Mark, for example, Mark Hyman, he's been one of those folks who's really come from that paradigm and seeing what that looks like, and then really understanding just how much our food matters, and taking that data, in conversations with Mark, for example, with how little our medical professionals are taught about food. And today, not even just that, but miseducated about food. And so then that's getting sent out in mass to patients, this really poor dietary advice, and wondering why they're not getting the results. And oftentimes what happens is, and me being in this field as long as I have as well, unfortunately, we think that the person's lying. We think that they're not following the diet program. They're not cutting their fat. They're out here guzzling, whatever it is, and they're just lying. When 9 times out of 10, they're working hard. They're really trying the thing, but it's not working because it was never designed to work.
Such a key point. And no affiliation with this company, but one company that I do want to mention, which is an at-home test. It's called a Mega Quant, and it's $99. Anybody can do it. It's a little prick test that you get sent home, and you can actually see what kind of fats is your body made out of. And it's tons of peer review evidence. They have an incredible clinical board that's out there, and it's not only something that I mentioned for people who are traditionally more vegetarian, vegan, other stuff, because I came from that world. It's also for people who don't realize how much processed food that they're eating. and how much their body is literally, it's like you went from using high quality bricks and stone to build your house to now you're using paper mache or like really, messed up Legos or something like that. and a little bit of wind comes, a little bit of sun stress, whatever, and your whole house gets knocked down. And that's what we're doing with our body is we're building our fats out of these really bad materials. So just a resource that's out there. You don't need a doctor. It's just an at-home test that people could do and immediately get results in terms of what does your omega-6 to omega-3 ratio look like? Because like you said, it's not that these things that we don't want to demonize them. It's when that ratio gets out of control that we start to get real challenges that are there.
Because those fats, if we're talking about these seed oils, it's quote vegetable oil, they're very high in omega-6 fatty acids, which again, there's a tendency in our inner circle for those to get demonized. Omega-6s are important for so many processes in the body.
Totally.
They're used, literally it can be used as an energy source. That's the primary use, but then they're used for different structures to make up, again, like I mentioned, making up our body fat tissue. So it's not that they're bad, but they are. And also inflammation gets a bad name because we need inflammation. Inflammation is the immune response. It's the process that happens when new cells are being made and old cells are getting removed. There's a balance there. We just don't want to be in this hyperinflammatory state. But today, that ratio, historically, we were looking at maybe about a 3-to-1. Most scientists agree 3-to-1 omega-6 to omega-3 ratio. Today, the average person on the low end is 17-to-1. All right, that's gone up, 4 times higher, but that's the low end of it, right? So some folks potentially is 50-to-1 and wondering why we're in this pro-inflammatory state in our bodies and in our brains. And so helping to shift that ratio over proactively, this is why DHA and EPA is so transformative, I believe, in these peer-reviewed studies, is because people are coming in so out of balance with them, so addressing that.
If you had to put a top 3, we've been talking about the beneficial foods and nutrients for brain health, cognition, focus, and long-term avoiding of cognitive decline, Alzheimer's. So those are the positive ones. If you had to take 3 that are really damaging our health, but especially our brain health, would you put seed oils in that category?
Absolutely.
Top 3?
Easy top 3. Easy top 3.
So seed oils is one of them.
Yeah.
Any others that you would include in that top 3?
Sugar is definitely the number one. And I'm coming from a place where I really understand, though. I understand. Because sugar it's also beautiful. It's associated with so many things cognitively, from, after your soccer game, you getting the treat afterwards, the ice cream or the pizza. We've got everything associated with, even love, Valentine's Day, you're giving sweets. I don't want to completely demonize something that has a beautiful side to it for connection.
That's
and
part
experience.
Of the nuance, right? That's the nuanced conversation that we have to have.
That's it. But in our culture, it's so far swung to the other direction where we're inundated with this absolutely devastating amount of sugar for the average person that it's tearing our bodies up from the inside out. And so that's really what it is. So this, for me, number one is sugar. I mentioned earlier about 70 pounds for the average American is consuming every year. 70 pounds.
I heard it was like 200. I thought we went from like 12 to 220 pounds.
Yeah. So this is added sugar.
Added sugar.
Which is, again, what's added in addition to the sugar contained within the foods.
Yeah.
So now we can get up somewhere in the ballpark of maybe 150 pounds of sugar a year for the average person. But again, it depends on where you look. I always like to err on the side of where we have the most evidence. And so, again, for the average person, somewhere in the ballpark of 70 pounds of added sugar, which is insane. Okay, that's like, I don't know, that's like a 4th grader. That's like the size of a 4th grader of sugar. So anyways, we've got that being one of the biggest issues. I already mentioned this. That consumption is, it's insane. It's so much, and it's driving so many different metabolic breakdown points. So we've got sugar. Then we've got the vegetable oils, these highly refined oils. And then I would say the third one, I don't even know why I'm struggling to say this, but it's so it's diverse, but I'll just say it in its umbrella point, which is pesticides consumption. So pesticides, herbicides, rodenticides, fungicides. Side means to kill, but it's really designed to kill very small organisms through, most of the time, they're either estrogenic or neurogenic. And man, the amount of pesticides that people are consuming today, like we haven't even gotten our finger on it exactly because, again, it's being studied now, don't get me wrong, but the level to which it just takes time because this industry is so powerful. We're talking about big agriculture. They're using these very cheap compounds to increase their yield. They don't care. Their number one objective is not your health, it's to make money. And so anything they can do to fight this information getting out. But anyway, so they're either estrogenic or neurogenic. And one of the studies that I shared recently on my show, which was one of the most eye-opening for me, was that we've got chlorpyrifos. Let me use chlorpyrifos as an example. It is well established now that chlorpyrifos increases the rate of brain development abnormalities for infants in the womb, higher rates of miscarriages for women who are pregnant, who are exposed to chlorpyrifos, but it's been caught up in red tape for years. It was actually about to be banned, but then it's kind of found its way back into circulation where it's still being able to be used without much warning to it. And so that's just one example, but one of the interesting studies was that pesticides were found to disrupt microbial gene expression. All right, so this is a good point to emphasize here in this episode too, is that, and you've talked about this multiple times on your show, the majority of genes that we have, so we look at ourselves and we see we're human, but we have upwards of 4 to 10 times more bacteria that make us up, depending on who you talk to. So we're talking 40 trillion, 100 trillion microbes, in the form of bacteria living in and on our bodies. But it's not just that, which there's supposed to be a symbiotic nature. You also have all of these bacteria genes as well. They have genes too. And they're running processes and functions that influence human functionality. This is one of the cutting edge places that we're at right now. And so if we go gene for gene, 99% at least of the genes that you carry around are microbial genes, not even human genes. All right. And there's the diversity of those genes. Like when we did the Human Genome Project, which I think there's still some flaws here, finding there's somewhere in the ballpark of maybe 22,000 genes we share collectively. Bacteria, those 99% that you carry, if we're going gene for gene, is so much more diverse. We're talking about millions and millions of different genes because they've had more time to develop and evolve and face off against different things for them to survive versus us, as humans, this outpicture of where we are today. Those genes inherently affect us. So to know that pesticides are detrimental to microbial gene expression,
designed to kill them intentionally.
That's scary stuff. What is that doing to our gene expression? What is that doing to our microbiome? What is that doing to, our gastrointestinal tract? What is it doing to our heart health, our brain? When I say that most pesticides are estrogenic or neurogenic, that means they have to be damaging to the nervous system of the pest. But we're just like, oh, we're bigger than a bug. It's not going to affect us.
Right.
But they
or nobody knows the total exposure that we get over the course of a lifetime, eating 3 meals a day,
right,
and getting it in concentrated forms in processed foods.
Right. And the fact that we're just looking at that isolated thing. Whereas today, we know that our microbiome is really a major hub, if not the hub, of the expression of our health. It's like the garden where everything is really growing from. And talking with Dr. Imran Mayer out there at UCLA, and he's been studying this for 40 years before anybody knew the word microbiome. So back when people thought he was nuts, like, what is this? What are you looking at these gut microbes for? Like, that doesn't impact anything. Whereas today, now it's a buzzword, really, but the science there is so beautiful and expansive. But when we understand that this pesticide it's not about damaging the human cells. They're definitely 1,000% damaging our microbes. These are small organisms, smaller oftentimes than the pests they're trying to kill, with these compounds that are neurogenic. And our bacteria have a version of a nervous system, but oftentimes they're considered to not have a nervous system. But they're able to sense. They're able to sense the environment to sense a form of pain and move away from that, to sense temperature, all these different things. We just don't understand it yet, but we just throw it out like, oh, bacteria, they're stupid.
They're dumb. They don't know what's going
These
on.
stupid
They'll be fine.
bacteria, they don't even have a brain.
Meanwhile, they're here controlling the show.
Right, exactly. The probiotics do not care. You could take probiotics until, I don't know, I've got some crazy analogy in my mind, but you could just keep taking probiotics until you become a probiotic. But they're not going to actually proliferate and
they don't
stay
colonize
in your system, exactly, unless they have their preferred food source. You have to have the foods that the specific strains of bacteria eat. And this gets into the conversation of this term prebiotic, which is it's become another thing we put in a pithy little box. Prebiotics is basically every food. Every real food provides food for specific bacteria, period. And yet we have like this camp of, and I do, of course, like I shared the general best practices with probiotics, the asparagus and Jerusalem artichoke and onions and garlic, all this stuff. But that's surface level. And then we get into inulin, we get into resistant starches. These are all things we got really great data on, them providing food sources to the microbes that are most associated with a healthy body composition, a healthy circulation, healthy blood sugar. We've got microbes that are associated with all this stuff. If we feed them correctly, they can stick around. It's kind of in my head, like even when I was about to make that analogy, it's like a Full House episode. Like we got to have everything right. Uncle Jesse has to have his stuff. The twins, you got to do
their own room.
Yes.
Everybody needs their own space.
But they can all work together. And that was a thing in the data most associated with because I already shared how the microbiome affects rates of obesity. How do we fix this? What we know today is that microbiome diversity is directly, as diversity goes up, obesity goes down. All right. We need to increase this gut diversity. And then what they did was they looked at samples from folks eating more of an indigenous diet, hunter-gatherer tribes. They found that their diversity versus a Western world citizen eating a kind of conventional diet, they have 4 times, 5 times, 10 times more diversity in their microbes than the average person does today. And knowing the diversity, again, as the diversity goes up, obesity goes down. As diversity goes down, obesity goes up. All manner of problems goes up. Then immediately we're just like, again, like, let me just take a probiotic. Let me get this diversity up. It doesn't work like that. There are some experts who believe that if you want to make the analogy of the microbiome being like a rainforest, there are some experts who believe that many of these microbes that are critical for human health are either endangered or they're extinct.
Right.
And I don't like to think in extremes or talk unless it's truly, truly there. I believe that we can improve, especially if there's other people walking around that have those bacteria. And this is seen in the data with these fecal transplants and people having complete transformations of their health and their microbiome and even their body composition from fecal transplants in both positive and negative ways, depending on the health of the person they get it from. So I don't like to speak in extremes that it's impossible, but we definitely have to do something differently. And I think the big walkaway point is for the bacteria associated. So there's like Bacteroidetes and like Firmicutes. There's like 2 camps, 2 general camps. There's so much more. There's Bifido and we could do a whole thing just talking about that. But Firmicutes are kind of associated with obesity and Bacteroidetes is more associated with healthy body composition. And so the saying is, if you want to be firm and cute, you need to reduce the Firmicutes. All right. I didn't make that up. All right. But how do we do that? And the thing that we know for certain is that if we increase the diversity of our foods, the prebiotics we're bringing in, we can reduce the amount of Firmicutes and increase the amount of Bacteroidetes. So this goes to, even if we're eating healthy, because I know a lot of folks who listen to this do subscribe to a healthier protocol. But our frameworks can get us so trapped that we become imprisoned by them and we get into our own little ruts, like every day it's avocado toast and, broccoli and the green juice, whatever, like you just put the stuff on repeat. And even if you get different stuff during the day, every week it's the same. We have to bring in a diversity of foods. That's how we evolved. If you go back again, the things that put up a red flag for me We evolved having different foods at different times of the year. Today, our lives are very different. All we have to do, we don't got to go through a season. We just got to go to the refrigerator. We can eat whatever we want, whenever we want.
Do you try to, as a family, you, your wife, your kids, do you try to intentionally seek out foods that you don't normally include? Let's say that's not in the standard, oh, I just showed up to Whole Foods in the vegetable aisle.
Yeah, definitely now, of course, in writing this book is more intentional for sure. And even just the exposure that I've had working at a university for so many years and my wife being from Kenya, you know, and so like my mother-in-law.
Shout out to your wife.
Shout out to Kenya. And so my mother-in-law being over recently and her cooking, you know, the dangu, you know, like the mung beans and chele, the rice and, you know, chapati, but she like upgrades the chapati and like uses like all of these heirloom grains and things like that. But things that normally I wouldn't on paper. What about the lectins? What about the anti-nutrients? All these things. They are remarkably healthy. Like as a culture, eating their traditional diet, like her mother like was just thriving, you know? And her mother is actually one of the healthiest people that I know, but it wasn't like that. When she moved here from Kenya, she had arthritis so bad, eating more of the American, she ended up having to walk with a cane because she was in so much pain. Right before we moved from St. Louis to LA, her and I were at the track doing sprints together.
That's incredible.
You know, to see that transformation, oh my goodness. You know what I mean?
I mean, for so many of my family members, you know, who are from India or were born in Kenya, you know, 4th generation Kenyan, a lot of my family that came from over there, they would healthy, you know, doing pretty good. Okay, there wasn't an abundance of processed foods, especially sugars, like the way that there's sugar and ketchup and tomato sauce and everything like that. So they didn't have the perfect diet over there, but the food was less adulterated.
Right.
There was less seed oils and other things like that. But even coming here, so many of them had issues with beans and lentils and other things, and then forgot that, wow, for generations, we've been using a pressure cooker.
Yeah.
Right. Even myself, I had issues with beans. I went vegan and I was eating just a ton of, you know, all that food over there and always have gastrointestinal stuff. And only was it in the last couple years that I decided to go back and have some of those foods and realize like, wow, when my mom makes it at home, I have no issue. Or when we go to India or when I went to Kenya a few years ago, I have no issue with these foods if they're prepared in the right process and method they were prepared in previously.
Yeah. And we both of us, we know the guys who've really pressed that into popular culture with the science around the lectins and things like that. Right. But so these anti-nutrients, but here's the thing, we have to, any diet framework, and this with Eat Smarter, it's a unifier. It's a unifier of diets because a lot of us in this community, we've been debating about the minutia, not understanding. Most folks are still doing the food pyramid, trying to change their health, you know,
instead of cut down soda and
the basic stuff.
Yeah.
But what we need to do is, what I looked at was what are the things, no matter what diet protocol you're subscribed to, whether it's a vegan protocol, keto protocol, here's the things that we know for certain will make that successful. Here's the things we know for certain, regardless of the diet you're doing, regardless of the exercise program that you have, these things are going to diminish that diet because it's really geared towards designing a promotion of fat storage, no matter what diet you're on. And so,
if I could interject with one thing, so I started wearing a continuous glucose monitor early in the year, and I think I had the experience that a lot of people have when they wear it is that. So even if you think you're eating healthy and you go into detail in the book and you especially have this 30-day plan, which I love, by the way, it's a new year. Everybody wants a plan. There's a great plan that's inside this book. So definitely get the book. But there's so many foods that even if you think you're eating healthy, that these companies, they're well-intentioned, right? They're trying to make alternatives. They're trying to make alternative tortillas. They're trying to make a keto bar that's available for you. But it's got cassava, it's got almond flour, it's got other stuff. Again, a formalization of processing doesn't mean that we can't have it ever, but if we miss the boat on how we used to eat, then we can unintentionally end up being an unhealthy, healthy eater.
Yeah.
And you see when you eat those foods, how much it spikes your blood sugar and how you can end up in a situation where, you know, a lot of my friends are, you know, over the last 5-10 years been having kids And a lot of the women especially were shocked. These are women that think that they eat so healthy, spend a ton of money on groceries, were shocked to find that they have, they're on borderline diabetes. What's the term? Gestational diabetes, I believe.
Yeah, that's right.
And they're like, how the hell could I, as a healthy eater, be in this situation? And basically your book is explaining how. If we don't understand how these things work inside the body, we're not going to know what to do to get ourselves out of the mess.
There's two things with this. This is so good. Number one, and I talk about this in the book, you can have the best diet in the world that's managing your blood sugar. It's not going to matter because stress can elevate your blood sugar just as much as any nefarious food can, all right, because of the action of cortisol. So that's one aspect. So I just want to implant that seed, but then circle back to what you said earlier, which is, and this is so important. When I mentioned earlier about the prebiotics, we have to look at our lineage. And this is where the conversation we started talking about Kenya. What does your genes expect you to eat? If we can look at your ancestors and maybe get a little bit closer to those foods, maybe it might be healing for you, but this diet framework says you can't have it. I'm inviting everybody to take back control and giving them permission to give themselves permission to eat what's best for them. And if it doesn't fit into that diet framework, if we want to be the best us, we have to be willing to just trust to experiment and try something else. Okay, so to give you an example, in mentioning beans or just a paleo protocol, and somebody might pull out all of these potentially inflammatory foods, right? Beans, rice. When I was in school, my professors taught me anything that's white just ain't right. Okay, so brown everything, brown bread, brown rice, brown pasta. And I remember the day I went to this Chinese food restaurant that I usually go to, and I was watching them, the owner's kids eating like white rice and like some steamed vegetables, whatever. And I'm just like, don't they get it? White rice is bad for you, like how do they not know this, But dude, for centuries, they've known. It wasn't just because to make it look pretty. It's because there's a potential gut irritant there in the bran of the rice, So just let's remove that, strip it away. And, it's not that this is super nutrient dense food. It's not making rice into a health food or white rice into a health food. But the brown rice can be a potential gut irritant for some people. But also that's where the fiber is found, additional nutrients, right? And so how do we reduce the amount of those lectins? Again, you mentioned earlier, pressure cooker, soaking, sprouting. Food was made differently back in the day. A lot of stuff, even breads were regularly fermented before, the finished product that you end up eating. Now, here's the thing. If you go and pull out entire categories of foods that your ancestors have been eating for centuries, you might get some initial results doing that, right? Somebody might, again, do a protocol that says, take away all these lectin-containing foods. And again, we know the guys, and a lot of that science it's absolutely valid. However, if your gut bacteria, like one of we'll just say a couple of bacteria strains that are most associated with healthy body composition for you and your ethnicity, and now it doesn't have its preferred food because it's stripped out along with everything else. And maybe the way you was preparing it was the problem. Now that strain of bacteria is gone. So maybe you lost weight just because of just inflammation or whatever things, you're bringing in more nutrients. The first year worked. And then all of a sudden the weight's coming back. And you're just like, I just need to paleo harder. I need to vegan harder. It's not working anymore. I've just got off my game. It's not, that's where we direct it to us. It's our fault. Instead of having the awareness that the framework itself, even though it worked at one time, your unique metabolic fingerprint can change. And we have to provide the nutrients for the bacteria that keeps us healthy. If we don't have that food for that bacteria strain. And so I just want to encourage a little bit more caution with folks completely eliminating foods, especially if their ancestors ate that food.
Right.
However, but not to say that the food that their ancestor was eating was good for them. We have to have both. We have to have a little bit more intelligence and patience with ourselves. And however, the industry, the diet industry, the book industry is very much, and I face this, and this is why this book took this time, because I wanted to get it right.
It's a sophisticated book.
Yes.
Right? For whether you're a beginner, but even if you're more advanced, it's going to take you on the journey of layers.
Yeah.
It's kind of like a lot of things in life. just like we've done episodes on, let's say, any kind of controversial topic, right? Okay, you can show this thing or you could show this other thing. Let's take in the layers of sophistication needed to work through and deduct actually what's going on so that we can make the right decision for us.
That's it. But they will tell you, and without saying the words, that people aren't smart enough. Just tell them what to do. Just tell them what to eat. And there are personality types that just want to be told what to do. Absolutely. But how has it served us? It has not worked thus far. I want to make sure that we have the tools, the education, the insights to make the best decisions for us right now. Give people the tools so that if a diet practice doesn't work 6 months from now or a year from now, they have the ability to pivot. They have the overall awareness and self-intelligence. And that's the key. At the end of the day, I'm directing folks continuously back to themselves because the very best biomarker we have is how you feel. But we're not taught on paper. Again, we're very big on objective measurements, and I love objective measurements. I'm obsessed with them. But subjectively, how you feel, name something more important than that. I'll wait.
That's it. You'll know. You'll know whether you feel good, whether you don't feel good.
However, if we are so externally focused, man, and this is the issue that we're dealing with today, we're so distracted. We're so pressured. We're so inundated with so much stuff that we're not listening to what's happening. We're not listening when the body is, because that little discomfort, the digestive discomfort, it's a signal that something is off. Your body's giving you some feedback that something needs to change. But if you ignore it and you ignore it for a week, 2 weeks, months, that alarm starts to fade into the background. It's not that it disappeared, it's just fade into the background. We come to accept it as normal. And now your body is screaming at you in another symptom. So this gastrointestinal issue is now turned into, severe psoriasis, or it's turned into issues, with your sleep quality. Now you have insomnia, whatever the case might be. Your body is going to keep trying to give you feedback. And if we don't listen to the small signals. So with those said, just paying attention to how we look, feel, and perform. Being able to see ourselves. We see ourselves every day like, oh, that's different. Just paying attention to ourselves and seeing how things affect us. Like if we're there with our food and we eat a meal and we feel especially like good, we got to take that mental note, because there's also something that I talk about in Eat Smarter that I'm really wanting to bring to popular culture is this very important tenet in nature, which is post-ingestive feedback. Food will tell you when you eat a food, your body is literally taking notes. Oh, okay, we got selenium from that. We got some copper from that. We got some magnesium from that. Your body is taking notes. So like, if when I eat this thing, I get these things. And how we evolved this post-ingestive feedback, flavors are basically like nutrition labels in nature. And flavors are associated with specific foods. Today, those waters have become a little bit muddy because of food manufacturers manipulating our ability to have that post-ingestive feedback. Because now we can make a thing taste like another thing, right? We can make some tofu taste like chicken. It might not be the exact, but when your body's eating that thing and it's not getting the nutrients that it's associated with, it starts to create this dissonance, So these are other parts that we're healing. I'm working on, okay, you might not even know it's happening, but we're clearing up the static on the line so that post-ingestive feedback is starting to work again, because your body is innately intelligent and food has an intelligence. And this is something that Mark said a long time ago. The food isn't just food, it's information. And what are you programming your cells to do? And once we can upgrade that stuff, man, it starts to get really good.
It starts to get really good. And also there's a deeper sense of peace inside of us and our relationships. So shout out to your wife. You dedicate the book to her. And I want to segue, using that as a segue into food and relationships. There's a section inside of the book about that. Tell us about what we need to know about how food can impact those relationships.
Yeah. For me, this is really the heart of the book. And we have to give people what they want. A lot of folks today, a big issue, of course, is our body composition, metabolism, and just providing the very best information on that. But food is one of the most powerful determinants on how we relate to other people. And as a matter of fact, just socially, everything we do is really revolved around food. It's how we evolved. And so food isn't something we could put in this pithy little box, you know? And also our environment affects what we eat, but what we eat also affects our environment. And so to put that into context for people, there was a really interesting study, and this was conducted by researchers at The Ohio State University. They wanted to see how folks having dysregulated blood sugar, how does that affect their ability to relate with their partner, who they love? This is their partner. This is somebody that they're in a loving relationship with. And there's this term now called hangry, but like we take this is a real thing. And so what they found was, and this is something we do all the time in our culture regularly, is we eat a food that creates this, you know, big blood sugar response, and then we go hypoglycemic. Our blood sugar drops. And for us, how we evolved, that's a very, very strong sign of danger. And so your body responds by increasing cortisol, increasing adrenaline when your blood sugar crashes. And so what they found was that folks who were in a relationship, when they were able to create dysfunction with their blood sugar, they found it far less likely for folks to resolve their relationship problems. And they found that they were much more aggressive towards their partner. Now, we kind of know this. These are things we might experience in our lives, but we never really like pay attention to it. If you look at it, so often we get into conflicts when we're hungry or nutrient deprived, we'll put it like that, when we're tired, when we're stressed, and we tend to translate that over to our partner, you know, these kind of but these are biological issues. Like we can know, like, I love this person. I know they're not against me, but right now it feels like they are totally against me.
Us versus them in this moment.
Yeah. They're on team hate me, you know, but the reality is often very different. And so let's stretch this out into another domain and look at directly how, because now we have data on how food affects our proclivity towards violence, for example. And this was highlighted in a study. This was conducted by researchers at Oxford University. And they took prison inmates, which is, on one hand, it's unfortunate because of the situation, but on the other side, with science, it's a ward study. So they're able to track everything. So you get some really great data back. But also it's great because you can see when folks think about prison inmates, they have a picture in their mind. They're probably aggressive, violent even. They probably don't follow the rules, whatever. Like we have these associations mentally, whatever they might be. Here's what they found. They took some of the inmates and they gave them improved nutrition in the form of supplements. Okay. So increased vitamins, minerals, essential fatty acids, which we know are critical. And we'll talk about this in a moment. And then they gave another group of the inmates placebos. All right. 3-month study. And here's what they found. The inmates that were able to receive increased nutrition had a 40% reduction in behavioral offenses. All right. Simply by increasing their nutrition versus a placebo. Also, and this was most shocking for me, these folks had a 37% drop in violent offenses simply by improving their nutrition. Now, how many folks are out here walking around that are deficient in critical nutrients that are helping to regulate their emotional stability, that's helping to regulate their mental capacity and just the ability of their executive function of their brain to be like, that's not a good idea. I don't need to respond like this. Most of us, again, we are the sickest nation in the history of humanity, self-inflicted. All right. 135 million Americans are diabetic or pre-diabetic right now. It's not a joke. So we're talking about blood sugar dysregulation. It's not a joke. Over 60% of the US population has some degree of heart disease right now. 70% of us are already on pharmaceutical drugs. 115 million of us are regularly sleep deprived. This is not the best us showing up. And now here's the thing. I want to make sure this is clear. When we're not well, it's not that it's impossible to have patience and perspective taken, to not be aggressive towards another person. It's just harder. It's harder.
You can tap into it, but it's almost like you got to tap into reserves, or you got to find another study like meditation, which are all beautiful things. Yeah. It just, you have to work harder towards them.
Yeah. And the point I really want to make and really help to impress us upon culture is that food matters. Food affects how we show up and how we relate to other people. Fat is so freaking important of the dry weight of the brain. It's the most important macronutrient. Your brain is literally made primarily of fat if we're talking about macronutrients. So how does this all work? Well, this starts off in the womb, and this also is carried out once we are born and we're breastfeeding. Mother's milk, if we're talking about that dietary construct, it is so abundant in fat. Specifically, about 50% of the fat found in human breast milk is saturated fat. Again, this is one of those things that's been vilified, that it's so bad for us. Why is the very thing we know for certain that humans are designed to consume when we are born? Why is that thing so bad? If 50%, upwards of 50% of the fat in mother's milk is saturated fat. So for cognitive development of babies, and as a matter of fact, there was a study that I just came across looking at if not only just the saturated fat, but getting to this point, DHA and EPA, and that construct, the amount of DHA and EPA in mother's milk, and seeing the direct and this was a multi-country study as well. It's an observational study, but they took into account other factors as well. They did a really good job, but they found that mother's milk that had the highest constitution of EPA and DHA, their children performed about 20% better on cognitive skills tests. All right. So we're talking about the template for our brains and what it's made of. Now, as we move into adulthood, now just to be clear, this doesn't mean that guzzling saturated fat is going to make your brain work better necessarily. The gates that allow in saturated fat actually start to decrease. But saturated fat is so important, your brain makes it itself. All right. So your brain literally can make its own saturated fat when it needs to. So getting it dietarily, this isn't saying saturated fat is bad, but it's also not saying that this is the primary brain fuel, because it's nuanced. What is a primary brain fuel from dietary perspective is EPA and DHA. These are critical. This is one of the most important takeaways from this episode today. And so researchers that they decided to do, again, another randomized controlled trial. This was published in the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition, to see what is the direct impact of DHA and EPA. And so what they did was they simply gave folks an increased intake of DHA and EPA versus a placebo. And they found that the folks, just within a matter of weeks consuming DHA and EPA, had a dramatic increase in memory and their reaction time just by including more of these nutrients. And so that started already. I'm just fascinated by this. So I'm like, why? What's going on here? Well, these essential fatty acids, DHA and EPA, these are known as structural fats in the brain. All right. So we know about white adipose tissue. We know about, visceral fat, subcutaneous fat. Those are storage fats. The brain doesn't have storage fats, thankfully, because during times of famine, if you had storage fats in your brain, your brain
end up eating your brain.
Yeah, you'd end up eating your brain for fuel. So it's good that we don't have storage fats. But the structural fats of the brain, EPA and DHA, are largely a big part of that. And what they allow for is signal transduction, like we talked about with electrolytes. They work in tandem with electrolytes to provide plasticity for the brain cells, form, structure, strength. That's how important these essential fatty acids are. And to lean into this further, so as I was digging into this, some of the most fascinating research, and these folks, these scientists actually use fMRIs and to actually look at the brain and see what's going on with the brain with intake of DHA and EPA. And they found that folks who had the lowest intake of DHA, specifically DHA was the most important, had the highest rate of brain shrinkage. So their brains were shrinking when they had a low intake of DHA and EPA as well, but DHA was even more prominent. And so what they found was that number was, if it's below about 4 teaspoons a day of DHA. I'm sorry, 4 grams. It's about 4 grams. Anything under that had accelerated brain shrinkage. The optimal range was 6 grams of DHA and EPA. These are people who had shrink-proof brains. Again, when we're talking about cognitive performance, with the brain size matters. This is one of those things that we don't want to lose brain volume. It's going to be correlated with a loss of cognitive function for sure, if you're literally losing your brain. And so this is how important DHA and EPA are. So when I said that this is one of the most important takeaways from this episode, I want everybody to be so adamant moving forward about getting their water in and getting in DHA and EPA specifically. What are the best dietary sources? And this is what I love about you as well. Like, we have that food first tenet. Where can we find this in its whole food form that's been used for the greatest amount of time? Number one, and this is working along with folks like, Lisa Mosconi out of NYU and people who are, again, looking at the brain and seeing, do these nutrients actually have an impact? She shared with me that caviar and salmon roe are the best sources of dietary DHA and EPA. And at the time, this was a few years ago when we were hanging out, caviar wasn't on my radar. Like I just didn't even, I didn't grow up around anything like that. So I saw it I literally knew it from Lifestyles of the Rich and Famous with Robin Leach. It was like a TV show. It was like the pre-Cribs.
Maybe a little bit of mention on Fresh Prince of Bel-Air.
Right, exactly, And so this was like pre-MTV Cribs. So this was like an original, like seeing how stars are living, right? And I remember caviar and this kind of thing. So I'm just like, wow, really? Because we often attribute fatty fish, which is an incredible source, again, of DHA and EPA. Salmon, mackerel, sardines, these are really, really dense sources. But if you're going gram for gram, you're going to find maybe 3 times more DHA and EPA in fish eggs than in the fish itself. So salmon, roe, and caviar. Now, again, I'm going to give multiple options for people. If that's not speaking to you, you don't have to run out and guzzle caviar. As a matter of fact, it'll probably cost a little bit too. So, but again, if you look at something like that, like, oh, wow, folks realize the value a long time ago of these things. They put a higher price point on it. The same thing with salt. The name salary is derived from the word meaning salt, the etymology of it, because people were paid in salt. I just saw this, I don't know what's wrong with me or right with me, but I've just watched these random documentaries and I was looking at this story of these goats. Have you seen the goats that climb up on these walls?
Yeah.
And they're like sideways, like what in the world are they thinking? They're like 200, 300 feet up in the air.
Yeah, like
on this
vertical, like completely vertical.
They're vertical and they have their babies, the little baby goats come up. They're called kids, right? Mm-hmm. The baby goats are called kids. They have their kids coming up on this wall and you're just terrified watching this. And they're doing it to be able to lick the minerals coming out of that, certain places that might be in that dam, for example. Sodium, right? Salt is so important. And again, there's multiple kinds of salt. Potassium salt, magnesium salt. They're willing to risk their life to get it, right? So anyways, putting all this back, with DHA and EPA, we got salmon roe, we've got caviar, we've got whole fish, fatty fish, salmon, mackerel, sardines, and many others. And then from there, we go to, and by the way, we're going to get to some vegan sources as well. This is very important. But then we go to grass-fed beef. It's going to be a great source, potentially, of these omega-3 fatty acids. But there's a big distinction between grass-fed and grain-fed. There's data, and I go in multiple times over and over again showing the difference in grass-fed versus conventional beef in the book because people need to know that conversation. It isn't just hearsay anymore. From there, we've got eggs, the egg yolk specifically, great source of DHA and EPA, and they can even be enriched as well. But now we get into, what about the vegetarian sources? And this is where things get a little bit complicated because for years as a nutritionist in my clinical practice, I was having folks, I'm talking, this was 15 years ago, hemp seeds, chia seeds, all of it. I'm having people take, hemp oil, get their omega-3s, right?
Because at the time you also were vegetarian.
Yeah. So, and I've done everything, and I'll do it years at a time to experiment with myself. And thankfully in my practice, I got away from having everybody doing what I was doing and instead focusing on what they need, which is really the move forward. And what's happening now is personalized nutrition. That's the wave of the future. But, again, I've been doing that and teaching that for a long time. So with that said, I was missing the point because that type of omega-3 is ALA. It's not DHA and EPA. All right. DHA and EPA are the ones that have express access into the brain. ALA does have a role and is important, but DHA and EPA is so important and your body won't do the opposite. Your body will convert ALA into DHA and EPA, but you can lose upwards of 70, 80, 90% in the conversion process, depending on your metabolism for being able to do that conversion. So to get the amount of DHA, we're talking about that bare minimum being 4 grams. To get that from a plant source, you're going to need to have a couple of cups of chia seeds. It's just not viable if you ever want to leave the bathroom, So it's not efficient, not effective. So what do? We can get in some from those sources, flax seeds, hemp seeds, chia seeds, all that good stuff. But I implore you, if you're doing a vegetarian approach, there's 2 other wrongs. So you've got krill oil, which depending on where you lie in your ethics, which is, and I'm going to find another name for this because when I say it, just the name, I think it can throw people off. It's a microscopic shrimp. Emphasis on microscopic. All right. It is so, like you can't, it's not like a shrimp like you would think. It's microscopic and it's abundant in oceans. This is what whales primarily feed on. It's so rich in nutrients that can create a massive brain. Like whales are hyper intelligent as well, if you look at some of the data on that as well. But anyways, krill is a viable option, but it's also rich in astaxanthin, which is this powerful antioxidant that helps to protect the omega-3s in there, the DHA and EPA, from oxidation. 9 times out of 10, it's going to be a higher quality source than you might find in conventional fish oils because of that protection from oxidation. And the reason I'm saying krill oil first is because we have peer-reviewed evidence on its effectiveness. All right, so we've got that with food, we've got it with fish oil, we've got it with krill oil, but not as much. 9 out of 10 peer-reviewed studies on omega-3s, DHA, and EPA are done with fish oil.
Right.
So we've got to acknowledge that. Not saying it's the best source, and you got to be careful with your sourcing. Krill oil, it's gaining some traction. It's being studied a lot more now. The next option of full plant source would be algae oil. We do know the DHA and EPA is there, but we got to keep in mind we don't have a lot of peer-reviewed evidence on it. But at minimum, I want to, again, put this emphasis. I implore you to make sure today to get your DHA and EPA to literally protect your brain from shrinkage. And this isn't like it's cold outside, you get into a cold plunge or whatever, shrinkage for guys. It's not that kind of shrinkage. It's like, this isn't the kind you can bounce back from easily.
Right.
Once
you shrink your brain, I mean, it's very hard to come back from that.
Exactly. So I want everybody to keep that in mind, how important our hydration is, and DHA and EPA is absolutely critical.
And, I think, I'm glad that you went through that full spectrum because as you mentioned, you and we've also tried a lot of different things, raw food, vegan, vegetarian, the whole gamut. And one of the arguments that was brought up back then that I also, made that argument too, is that, well, let's look at animals, right? Let's look at a gorilla. What does a gorilla eat? They're not eating fish, right? How is their body and brain and their muscle size so big? And the key distinction between, a lot of these big animals, even whales and, gorillas and human beings, is a lot of those animals are eating all day long.
All day.
So if you're talking about
Constantly.
just like you made that analogy of like, okay, sure, you can try to get your, those essential oils and fatty acids from chia seeds, but just actually look at the data in terms of how much you're going to get and then know that human beings aren't really designed to be eating that amount. Right. You're going to be pooping and eating all day long, which is not going to leave any room for anything else that's there. So we're just a distinct and a completely different animal in our evolution. So we got to find what works for us specifically.
I love that. Yes, we've been designed, we've evolved to be more efficient in digestion, to have a lot more energy for cognitive performance and creation. That's the thing about humans. That's what makes us so miraculous. And, Michio Kaku, astrophysicist, he said that the human brain is the most complicated organ in the known universe. And it is. Like, when we have one, the coolest thing is, like, everybody listening, you have one of the most powerful, complicated, complex organs in the known universe. But I think that we really struggle to understand how we got to where we are today. We abandoned a lot of that thinking. And one of the biggest steps in our evolution was the ability to eat more nutrient-dense sources of food and to extract more energy from our food through cooking, which, again, we both done long stints on raw food, for example. And I remember, like, I didn't touch anything cooked except maybe some tea for several years. And I did this in Missouri, which is not the health hub. There was no raw food restaurants there. I felt like Tom Hanks on that island by myself many times, me and Wilson eating, a salad in Missouri in the winter. And so, but to completely vilify something that helped us to evolve is not appropriate. Not to say the raw foods can't be wonderful, but we got to look at this in all in context. And so our digestive systems became much smaller. Again, if you look at the the other animals that subsist on plant foods strictly, there's so much energy caught up in digestion. There's so much complexity to the digestive system.
Multiple stomachs in some cases.
Right.
I mean, just a lot more going on.
It's a lot more going on. And I want to share this with everybody too, because I think that we don't realize just how much energy is taken for digestion just in general. The majority of our energy that we use on a day-to-day basis for the average person is used to digest the food that you eat. All right. So just imagine how much energy is being siphoned by constantly eating or eating the wrong stuff. And this is important because when you realize that how miraculous eating is in the first place, like, we'll just say somebody's eating that fish that we talked about. They're eating some salmon, they're eating some walnuts, which we'll talk about in a minute. They're eating some, a leafy green salad. That food is going to become what you see in the mirror. That food is going to become your brain. It's going to become your heart. It's going to become the blood in your veins. Like your body is taking that food and turning it into human tissue. That's a freaking powerful, amazing thing to realize. Like, and you get to choose what you make yourself out of. And of course, there's going to be waste and all that kind of stuff, but you're making your body out of this stuff. So your body takes that very seriously. It's a large energy requirement to convert that food into you. The digestion, assimilation, elimination, moving everything where it needs to go. So we start to understand how much energy is required for it. And so we want to make it count, but at the same time, again, I'm a big proponent of what are the best sources? What are the most nutrient-dense sources that are backed by science and also backed by our ancestors? And taking that data and marrying it together. And another one of those that I want to share. So we talked about EPA and DHA, but we also have phospholipids. And these aren't talked about very often as well. So phospholipids are primarily made from omega-3s, but you can also find them dietarily by themselves. And I wanted to share this because this was one of the coolest studies. This was done recently, a double-blind, placebo-controlled, randomized trial, so gold standard of clinical testing. And this was looking at the consumption of phospholipids, and they found that having test subjects increase their intake of phospholipids helped them to enhance their attention span and also improve reaction time. But here's the important part. This was done when test subjects were put under stress. So it helped them to focus under stress. Wouldn't that be helpful today? We're inundated with stress. So phospholipids can help us to improve our focus, improve our performance when under stressful conditions. And again, this is going back to what is the brain made of. And phospholipids really function as similar with DHA and EPA, structural fats that provide shape, strength, elasticity for our neurons as well. So what are the best sources of phospholipids? Funny enough, eggs, egg yolks, far and away, great source of phospholipids. Also, we've got oats, krill, another great source. Milk, sunflower seeds are a pretty good source. Salmon roe, crab meat, this is another great source of phospholipids. But again, a lot is talked about in the domain of brain health along with fats, but it usually revolves around big idea fats, just get in some kind of fats, saturated fat, omega-3s. Phospholipids matter too. And then they go into their own subsets of like phosphatidylserine. There's so many other things there that we can geek out on, but just proactively getting in some phospholipids, I think, is going to be another game changer as we move forward. Every thought you have has correlating chemistry that's produced in your body. This is incredibly powerful. Your brain is the most powerful pharmacy in the known universe. And I say that because it's making the chemicals specifically designed for you. It's bioidentical for real. This isn't just like you're taking some external substance that your body, your liver has to try to figure out. Now, with that said, this is something we talked about as well. We have to be mindful, and I don't feel that there were enough voices in the room making the decisions about how this has been handled clearly because of the very, very critical, especially in that elementary school age, of the social and emotional development of the human brain. This is so important because some of this stuff can create permanent damage if children aren't able to develop that social and emotional skill. Like you need to be able to kick the kid's toy and like see what the response is and to like get that physical feedback. And my son, fortunately we have, his best friend lives next door, so they've had each other. But they have a friend who they go to school with who hasn't seen another child in 5 months. And we both had that same thing. Even when I shared the story, like, oh, that's going to be a problem. And so many children, we're being inundated. Unfortunately, there's a level of intelligence and safety, but then there's a level of extreme, which is where we're leaning towards, of children being led to believe and taking on the idea that they're not enough, that their body isn't enough, that they're not safe in this world. And we really need to talk about this. Like, we really need to look at this, because we can be creating an entire generation of humans who are afraid of other humans. And that was my concern at the
or just even afraid of getting sick.
Right.
Just the fear of getting sick is going to make you more likely to get sick.
Exactly. And this isn't just like hearsay. We know this, that we got data on this. And there's an entire biology of fear. When you're having these stressful thoughts, when you're tuned into the news and you're seeing a death toll ticker, when humans have been relented to being numbers on a screen, no longer souls, you become conditioned to you start to see the world very differently. And bringing that into the world itself, it can start to create so many very strange like biases, as we talked about before. And for me, I think, and this is it's a tough subject to talk about, but a big part of the reason I do what I do, even writing this book, is my concern about our future generations, my concern about our children. And for this to be happening right now, I think it's actually wonderful. And I know it's kind of messed up to say, but I think it's because we had so many issues festering underneath the surface that we're not getting addressed. The child abuse, the sexual abuse, the problems with our education system, the massive problems with the education system, our workforce. And I know you've done stuff on this as well, and looking at the rates of unhappiness in our culture. And we're going into an education system that gets us ready to do a job that many people are unhappy about. And they spend their lives, that's their lot in life. And we can do something better. At this point as humanity, we can reimagine these things. We can reimagine these systems. But this at its core is supposed to be a health issue. And yet we are the most unhealthy society in the history of humanity, self-inflicted.
Right. Yeah, I heard a quote that you shared earlier, and I posted it today, and it said, especially when you look at the lens of the pandemic and what we went through, chronic disease, which impacts so many different things. The inputs of chronic disease don't just create chronic disease. They can create chronic divisiveness, which we'll go into in a second, which you said chronic disease loaded the gun and COVID pulled the trigger. Thought that was great. I don't know if you posted that as a quote, but I definitely reshare that.
Yeah, this is the thing that, I shared data on this very early on when I saw the data coming out of Italy from their health minister. And he affirmed that 88% of the folks who lost their lives there had one or more pre-existing chronic diseases. About half of them had two or more. And for me, as soon as I saw the data, I was just, I was trying to do the Paul Revere thing. Like, hey, we've got a problem here in America. We're very susceptible. And then sure enough, ultimately the CDC published the report just a couple months ago that 94% of the folks who lost their lives had an average of 2.6 pre-existing chronic diseases, most notably being hypertension, type 2 diabetes, and obesity. And a lot of folks don't realize that when we're talking about these obesity numbers, obesity is associated with about 400,000 deaths every year. Not just this year, every year. And it's not just like, oh, this is a side note thing. This is a major issue. And the systems that encourage and support and even make money off of the sickness of our population are still running things. And we're still thinking we're deficient on a drug. Like we just need a drug to save us. We needed somebody to come through and provide this thing. We're inherently flawed. And these are the system itself is designed in such a way that if you're well, you have no value to the system. We need sick people. It's the farming of sick people. And so 94% of the folks in the United States who lost their lives, 2.6 pre-existing chronic diseases. We can look at this from the mindset of like, oh, they were going to die anyways. No, that's not the case. That's not the case at all. Being exposed to an infectious disease when you are already susceptible, when your immune system is already compromised, radically increases your incidence of severe and or untimely death, severe symptoms or untimely death. But the media focuses on the 6% who are healthy. And they just tell you the stories of the person who's he's a college student, he's perfectly healthy, but they don't tell you about the 94%.
Right. And even that person may not had a diagnosable chronic disease.
Right.
But as we know, and as I talk about deeply in the world of functional and integrative medicine, you can still have major things going on with you and not have a diagnosis.
And not just that, me and you, we can be as healthy as we want to be. We could have the best diet, we sleep well, all that stuff. We move well. But if we stray from those things that our genes expect us to do, if all of a sudden I'm sleep deprived, now I'm going on 3 days, I'm trying to work on this project, I'm stressed out, I'm watching the news, whatever it is, even though on paper I'm healthy, right? I didn't have a diagnosis, I can compromise my immune system. As a matter of fact, the journal Psychoneuroendocrinology published a study, and they found that just one night of sleep deprivation leads to suppression of your immune system, most notably suppression of your natural killer cells, which the FDA fast-tracked drugs that target our NK cells because our NK cells were so effective at killing SARS-CoV-2 infected cells.
Right. So now you have an opening in the wall and something can come in, virus, pathogen, whatever, which normally your body would be able to block out. But we're all human beings. You can have a moment just like anybody else, and you can become susceptible.
This can happen to any of us at any time. This is why they're called opportunistic. This is why. And like we were talking about this before the recording, we all carry around pathogenic, opportunistic viruses, bacteria, fungi, things that can literally kill us if we become compromised. A lot of times we think we, quote, catch a bug, but many times it's actually something we already have in our system or on us.
Floating around.
Yeah, that we're already exposed to, that's already in our system, that gets on top of us because our immune system is compromised.
Much in the same way that often now the understanding around things like the shingles, right? Mm-hmm. The understanding for like a lot of older adults can be at risk of shingles. Well, we know that the shingles virus has been inside of them before, but what causes it to be in a situation to be expressed?
Yep.
Our immune system going down, maybe increased rates of inflammation inside the body, poor diet, lack of movement. All of a sudden, something that was there the whole time now can have a chance to grow. And I know you also had, we had him on and you had him on, Jason Fung, who talks about the whole new view of cancer inside the body. And the latest understanding of cancer is that cancer isn't so much of a disease that happens to us. It's a survival mechanism when certain healthy cells get put in a specific environment.
So I haven't talked to him yet. We're getting it set up.
Okay.
But yes,
excuse that.
No, I'm very, of course, like we're on the same page with many of these things because, we all have cancer cells every day. And it's just like, it doesn't exist in the popular narrative. We all have cancer cells every single day. It's just an almost normal part of cellular replication in a sense. It's not normal, it's abnormal, but it happens so often. But your immune system takes those rogue cells out. And then also, what about how are they getting fed, right? Angiogenesis. They need blood vessels. They need a nutrient supply. We've got so many nutrients and foods and things that are clinically proven, double-blind, placebo-controlled studies finding that certain, like curcumin, for example, has anti-angiogenesis properties that cuts off the nutrient supply to cancer cells and fat cells. Fat cells, they need it, same thing. They need that nutrient supply. But the thing about food is that it has an intelligence to it. It's selective because you don't want that to happen to all of your cells, right? Just the problematic places. And so, man, it's so remarkable that, again, we're starting to really open up the conversation and get some of this. And by the way, when you mention the shingles, the number one part here is that this virus is able to hide out in your nervous system. And we've evolved to our immune system to not attack our own nervous system. And so this is what makes it so clever. But what is the number one thing? Nervous system. It's related to stress. So guess when the flare-up's going to happen is when you are under stress. And this is the thing about the conversation of stress. We tend to think it's one very vanilla thing. Like, I'm not stressed about work, like whatever. You have an overall stress load, which includes, of course, work stress, relationship stress, exercise stress. Exercise is a hormetic stressor. It can be great for you, but you get the benefits when you recover. If we go through, me and you, we do a 30-minute, tough workout, we lifting, doing some, some metabolic work. And then we go get a blood panel done and a hormone panel, we're going to look really messed up. We're going to look, our blood sugar is going to be dysregulated. Stress hormones are going to be up. We might even have like some insulin resistance. We might walk away with the drug. Like we might get a prescription and all we did was do a workout, and your body's trying to heal and sort it out. And that's the thing. Exercise is wonderful. However, if you add that on top of the other stress, and then you add in environmental stress, right? You add in abnormal, this quote, light pollution that we're talking about today. You add in diet stress, because diet is a major stressor potentially. It can be, again, a tool of healing and happiness or a weapon of degradation and disease. Your overall stress load, and then you're gonna eventually, it's just gonna be too much. It's like the bowling ball out of the 747, it's gonna drop. And so how do we address these things? And mainly, again, one of the most controllable, but also the most pervasive in our culture that has gotten away from us is our food. If we can get the food right, it makes everything else work better.
Hey YouTube, if you enjoyed this mashup, you're gonna love this interview with my friend Jason Fung on what really causes cancer. Check it out.
The seed of cancer actually lies in every single one of our cells. And that's why it's so common in terms of it affects all animals, all multicellular animals.